Whiteboard time again. Everyone loves whiteboard videos. Here's another one. The equinox is coming. That's the transition between summer and winter, or winter and summer. It's the time of year when the length of daylight hours is about the same as the length of nighttime hours. So it's also the time of day when weather systems start warming up. We have the warm and the cold start mixing, and we start getting some really powerful weather systems, which means wind, lots and lots and lots of wind about this time of the year. It's called the equinoctial gales, and some people, they just prefer to sit inside and watch the trees wave around, but me, no, I actually prefer to go flying. And today on the whiteboard, I want to talk about flying in wind, because it is, for some people, one of the scariest things they ever do, but for people like myself, it's one of the most fun things to do. Now, flying in wind, you might think, ooh, a bit dangerous, a bit tricky, a bit difficult. No, it's not actually. There's a lot of myths about flying in wind. I'm going to try and dispel some of those myths today. And I'm going to show you some of the basics of how to fly safely in wind without wrecking your model and without endangering other people. So here are some basic steps. Let's start with the first step. The first thing is your choice of model. You need to choose a suitable model. If you've never flown in strong winds before, if you want to get used to and learn how to fly in strong winds, you need to choose a model that's suitable. That means probably not a Spitfire, not an EDF jet, not a biplane. You want something that's simple, something like an AXN or a Bixler, or something like the FMS Super Easy, which is my choice for this particular video. You want a model that is predictable, that has a reasonably wide speed range, has a good power to weight ratio, and something that you've flown quite a bit before, something you feel comfortable flying, because flying in strong winds, especially if there's turbulence around, can really test your flying skills. But it's like everything. The more effort something requires, the more reward, the more fun, the more pleasure you get from doing it. And that's where flying in wind is so good. Right, so you need to choose the right model. Right, model choice. And I don't mean Claudia Schiffer, or whatever her name is, choice. How do you spell choice? That's how you spell it. So number one, model choice. Choose the right model, and that will go a long way towards ensuring that your flying in wind is successful. Now the next thing is, number two, check your model. Flying in the wind can put a lot of stress on the airframe, because you get things wrong. Things happen a lot more quickly. You may find yourself pulling more G's, and you may find yourself, let's face it, crashing. It's going to happen. You're going to crash. So you need to check the model, make sure the linkages are secure, make sure that the wing is firmly mounted. If it's and I recommend a conventional layout model for learning to fly. Flying wings is not so much fun. They get thrown around more for a start. They tend to get thrown around a lot in strong winds. So a conventional layout like an AXN, a Bixler, or a FMS Super Easy, whatever, much better choice. But check the model. Make sure there's no linkages about to pop off. Make sure the hinges are secure so you're not going to lose an aileron or an elevator with obviously unfortunate results. And make sure the wiring is good. So you want to be able to rely on this model. You don't want unexpected things happening. Just at the moment, you most need full control. So check your model. Right. Next thing is check your flying area. Put it up number three. Flying area is important. Why is it important? Because there are two aspects to flying in strong wind. First thing is you're going to have wind. Okay? Wind is easy to handle. Wind is not a problem. Turbulence is a problem, however. So let's assume that you are out here. Here's a flat field. Here's you. And don't I draw you well? There you go. And here is your model. Let's draw a little plane here with a wing and a propeller and wheels, perhaps. There you go. You've got a lot of wind blowing along here. That's fine, because believe it or not, once your model leaves the grip, once it leaves your grip or the ground, it doesn't know there's any wind. It really doesn't know there's any wind. Once a model has left the ground, wind no longer exists, because it's all relative. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But there's your model flying. Great. If it's a steady, constant breeze, it's a piece of cake. Piece of cake. But what often accompanies strong wind is turbulence, and that is really far more exciting, far more difficult, far more fun to fly in. So if you're just learning, you don't want the turbulence. You want a nice, steady breeze. You can cope with that very easily. So you want to make sure if you're learning to fly in a strong wind, stay away from things like houses, trees, or anything else that's going to cause the wind to become turbulent and gusty, because that'll make your flying experience much more difficult. So you want to stay away from these things. You want a nice open expanse with nothing upwind of you if you can avoid it. That gives you a clear, undisturbed airflow, easy to fly, and even a strongest wind makes it much easier. So there you go. Flying area is important. Also, you want to look downwind. take a look, the way wind's coming this way, take a look down this way, because if you do lose control of your model and it gets blown downwind, where's it going to end up? You don't want it disappearing over a busy road or something. So you need to have an area that gives you enough room to get a model down if you decide, well, it's gone too far away, I need to dump it in a safe area. So your choice of flying spaces, until you're really good at flying in a strong wind, becomes a little more restrictive. You've got to make sure you choose the safe options, and these are the safe options. There you go. Now, assuming you've got all that sorted, the next thing is what you need to do is your basic flight procedures. The first thing is flying in a strong wind. You want to get your model off the ground or out of the launch as quickly as possible. You don't want to dally around near the ground, because the ground is the only thing that's going to break your model. So the sooner you get away from it, the safer you're going to be, which means if you're flying something with wheels, take off, climb reasonably steeply. Don't risk a stall, but fly steeply upwards so you get a bit of separation. You've got a few mistakes of altitude, because altitude is your friend. You make a mistake, you've got time to recover. If you're flying at 10 feet and you make a mistake, you've only got time to pick up the pieces. So you want to climb quickly. So from the takeoff, you want to climb quickly. There you go. Get up, get some safety, get some safe altitude under you, and that gives you more room to move. Now I'm going to draw a picture. Here we are, here are you. I'm going to look down on your head. Here we go, that's your head, there's your feet. Well, here's your transmitter. So we're looking down onto you, that's your hat perhaps, looks a bit better. And here's the wind direction, it's blowing this way, right? So here comes the wind. Now, here's your model. Let's put your model down there. This propeller. You take off into the wind. Always take off into the wind, directly into the wind. If you take off with a crosswind, your model may tip over on takeoff, or if you're launching it, it may get caught by the wind and flipped into the ground. So always take off directly into the prevailing wind. And that means that you'll be much more stable out of the launch or the takeoff, righto? So take off. Now the next really important thing, I cannot emphasize this too much because I've seen so many people get into trouble, is imagine a line along here, right? Oops, oh no, I've crashed my marker pen. You always want to be flying upwind of this line. You do not want to fly back over your head. You want to be upwind, and preferably, quite a way upwind. And why would you do that? Well, I've just mentioned being a few mistakes high, so you've got room to recover if you make a mistake. Now, one of the problems that most people face at some stage is they might get disoriented, put a wrong control input in. And if you're flying on a calm day, it's not that much of a problem because the model, you can just recover it and keep flying. But if you're flying in a really strong wind and you're up here and you make a mistake, it only takes a very short period of time for the wind to blow the model right back over your head. And then it's behind you. And then you're in trouble. Because if you still can't get orientation, it's just going to get blown further and further away until it disappears or you dump it on the ground. So stay upwind. So if you make a mistake because you get disoriented, it's just going to blow the model closer to you. So you get a better look at it. It gives you more chance to make a recovery and keep flying. So always fly in front of yourself into the wind, never behind yourself. And that can involve initially, if it's a strong wind, you might find that you don't actually have to do any circuits. You take off and you can just fly to the right, to the left, to the left, to the right. So you can do an S. You can fly in an S pattern. And because you've got the wind constantly bringing you back, you'll fly in front of yourself. Even though you're going from side to side and forwards, you'll end up sitting in roughly the same piece of airspace. It gives you time to get familiar with how the model's handling in the wind and get a feel for it, get the nerves to wear off, because it is quite nervous the first few times. So you get rid of your nerves, that's fine. Now, if you want to fly a circuit, and I recommend you do left and right hand circuits to get used to it, then again, don't fly around yourself, fly up, then fly back around like that. So you're still always in front of yourself, always in front of that magical line. So that if you make a mistake here and, oh, I went the wrong way, and you come back, you're still going to be in front of yourself. It's going to blow the model towards you. If you fly around a circuit like this and you make a mistake here, you might end up way back over there because the wind's blowing you. So always stay in front of the magic line. Absolutely important. So I recommend that you do figure eight. So you fly around there, then come around and do a figure eight that way. And just, get familiar with the model, see how it handles. And that gives you plenty of wiggle room. You're 2 mistakes high and you're a mistake or 2 upwind. And then the mistakes won't matter quite so much. And now I want to talk about a few of the myths. There are a lot of myths involved in flying in wind. One of them is the fear of a downwind turn. There are people who say, if you're flying into the wind and you turn downwind, you risk stalling. The model may stall because suddenly it doesn't have the same amount of wind going over the wings, which is utter rubbish. Excuse my French. It's utter bullcrap. No, the model, as I said earlier on, doesn't know it's flying in wind. If you think about what wind is, imagine the model is flying around in a circle. Wind is simply the fact that the ground is moving underneath it. The ground is moving in a general direction. The airflow is constant, apart from turbulence. So the model doesn't, if you fly in a full-size aircraft, once it leaves the ground, you don't know there's wind. Apart from a little bit of turbulence, you don't know which way the wind's blowing unless you look out there and work out which way your general drift is. Once you're in the air, the only thing that moves relative is the ground. And in wind, there's no such thing as stalling on a downwind because the wind is so strong. What happens is, what tends to happen is that if there is a lot of wind, say the wind's coming this way, like so, and your model is flying into the wind, excuse that, that's a crappy, it's an excuse for a model, isn't it? You're flying into the wind like this, okay? The model will appear to be flying quite slowly because obviously the wind is coming back. So the ground speed will be lower than the airspeed. So flying at a normal airspeed, the model will have quite a low ground speed with a strong wind. So you'll be flying up here, and you might think, oh, I'm going to turn back downwind. And then what happens, the reason that sometimes people tend to stall their models when they turn downwind is nothing to do with the wind blowing over the wing or anything like that. What happens is, here you might have a ground speed, say your airspeed is 100 kilometers an hour, but there's a 50k wind. Okay, that means if you subtract the wind speed from the airspeed, you get a ground speed. So this is airspeed. You get a ground speed of 50. Ground speed. So the model appears to be travelling at 50 kilometres an hour. Yeah, it's just okay, because although it's travelling at 100k through the air, the wind is 50k. So it looks like it's flying quite slowly. Now, when you do this turn here, suddenly the model is going to accelerate quite a bit. Because you'll have 100k of airspeed plus 50k of wind speed. So now you're going to be doing 150 kilometers an hour relative to the ground. So the natural tendency when people see that, if they're flying in wind, they're flying slowly into the wind, they do a turn, the model speeds up, they think, ooh, 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 so they cut the throttle and pull on the elevator to slow it down. And that's when bad things happen, because the model itself is traveling at exactly the same airspeed. As far as it's concerned, it hasn't changed speed. It hasn't changed speed. But when you try to slow it down to the same speed you were doing into the wind, suddenly, if you want this to do 50 kilometers an hour going downwind, then you've got 50k of wind, it will stall and fall out of the sky because it'll have no airspeed. So you need to realise, you need to appreciate that when the model goes downwind, it's going to travel much faster than when it's travelling into the wind. So don't be surprised when it starts speeding up downwind, and don't try and compensate for it. Don't try and slow the model down, or you'll stall it because you'll run out of airspeed. I hope that's sort of understandable, but yeah. And that's why some people, when they fly and they turn downwind and they haul on the elevator to slow the model down, it stalls and falls out of the ground. And what they mistakenly think is, gosh, it's stalled because now the wind is blowing behind and there's not much wind flying over the wing. No, nothing to do with it. You've slowed the model down to the point where it stalls. So that's why I recommend doing those circuits in front of you to get a feel for how fast the model's going to go up and down wind. And don't play around with the elevator too much, just keep it level. Don't try and slow it down, and keep a constant throttle setting. Don't try and slow the model down on the downwind leg, or you do risk stalling. And again, that's why I say use a nice predictable model. If you've got something like the FMS Super Easy, they don't really stall, they just mush. And you'll be able to see, whoa, what's going on? I've got, it's getting all wobbly, there's no control response, but it's not falling out of the sky. So something with a nice constant chord wing, relatively lightly loaded. Now, some people do say, if you're going to fly in wind, you've got to put ballast in, you're going to make a heavy model flies better in wind. Nah, not true, not true. It's been my experience that heavy models, because they stall at a higher speed, are actually sometimes harder to fly in wind, because people will pull back on the elevator as it speeds up, and because it's a heavy model, it stalls at a higher speed, falls out of the sky. So a nice lightly loaded model that's flying in a wind speed which is less than its maximum speed can be flown quite easily, and it's less likely to have this problem. So don't let people fool you into thinking that wind affects the model once it's in the air. It has no effect whatsoever. Now, one skill you should have before you start flying in strong winds is the ability to fly towards yourself, line of sight. A lot of people are not really comfortable flying towards themselves. They've got to think about which way do I push the stick to correct that, turbulence or whatever. You need to be able to do that without thinking. You need to have that sort of wired into your brain. So keep flying, keep flying, keep flying until you don't even have to think twice about which way to push the stick when flying towards yourself. And that is because you're going to have to fly towards yourself to land. You can't get around that. You always have to fly towards yourself to land if you want to land within close proximity to yourself. So in that respect, wind, depending on what you've got upstream, the houses and the trees, you're going to have some turbulence. Even on a perfectly flat field, you're still going to have a bit of turbulence. And why is that? Well, it's because here's the ground, and here's the wind. And because of the roughness of the ground, you're going to get a thing called wind shear. So the wind near the ground is much slower than the wind up here. The higher you go, the stronger the wind. Because down here, the ground is slowing it down. It's actually getting dragged from the ground. So you might have, let's look at it, you might have, say, 10 kilometers an hour here. You might have 15 here. You might have 20 there. So as you come down, the wind speed is going to drop. Going to drop. But what happens here is because you've got these layers of air sliding, you do tend to end up with a little bit of rolling turbulence like this. Because this is going faster at the top, it tends to roll around and go underneath, so you will get turbulence near the ground. Generally speaking, it's not bad on a wide open space, but you will get a bit of turbulence. That means on approach, your model is going to be wibbly wobbly, and you have to be able to correct that immediately. You can't wait and think, now which way do I push that stick? Because by the time you've worked that out, your model's upside down on the ground. So practice on calm days flying towards yourself. Get really used to it. It becomes an incredibly valuable skill. But speaking also of this wind shear, now you've got your model flying along. You need to approach with a fair amount of speed on. No, I've been airspeed, not ground speed, airspeed. The model needs to be flying quite comfortably, not right on the stall. Because let's imagine your model stalls at a certain speed. And say you are up here. Here's your model. And if you're flying at, say you're flying at 15 kilometers above the stall speed, right? Yeah, great. And you're looking at it from the ground and it's moving at a certain rate. That's fine. You've got 20k of wind blowing over the thing. So you've got 5k excess over stall there, right? If the model was if it was just sitting motionless. As you come down, however, the wind speed drops. So if your model is traveling at the same speed relative to the ground, it's actually flying slower through the air because the wind is lower. Sorry, I'm facing the wrong way. This should be the propeller and this should be the tail. We're going this way, right? As you come down, the wind drops. So the airspeed of your model will drop if the ground speed remains the same. So expect as you come in for the model to actually pick up a bit of ground speed because it's going through less and less wind. And if you try and keep it at the same speed, then when you get to here, you may find that, suddenly it's actually below the stall speed and it will just fall onto the ground again. It's all about judging that difference between ground speed and airspeed, and that's just down to practice. You just got to practice. One thing, as I said, you are going to have rough landings when you learn to fly in the wind. It's going to happen. That's why you choose a model that's robust and resilient, like the AXN or some other similar trainer. My FMS Super Easy has had so many topsy-turvy landings, and apart from the occasional broken prop and a bit of hot glue, she's good as gold. So you've got to appreciate that. Don't do this with your best model. Don't do it with your $5,000 scales, quarter scale Spitfire or something. It's just, no. Choose an old model you've been flying for years and you know how it flies. And then when you dork it, when it ends up nose first in the ground, you're not going to cry about it, but you've learned something along the way. So there you go. Be aware of the wind shear, which means as you get closer to the ground, you'll have to speed the model up relative to the ground to keep it flying. If you try and hold it at the same speed, it could stall and fall on the ground. Simple stuff. So those are the basic things to be aware of. And that's really it when it comes to flying in the wind. Just keep your common sense about you. One other issue which I should raise is, and I'll just go back, I'll just change jump cut. Here we are back at the magic line scenario. Wind's coming this way. There's the magic line. What's going to happen at some stage is you are going to lose control. You're going to make a mistake. And even though you're one mistake upwind, you might make two mistakes in a row, which means the model will suddenly disappear over your head and be downwind here, right? And facing and heading the wrong way. So it's going downwind at quite a bit of speed because it's the flying speed plus the wind speed. And so you've got to do something then. You've got to decide what you're going to do. If you are lucky, you'll be able to spin around, turn it around into the wind and fly back. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get a bit flustered or the model, it's a grey day and the model's hard to orient and suddenly you realise things are going wrong. It's just going further and further downwind. And it's getting a smaller and smaller speck in the distance. You have to make a decision at that stage. What do I do? Most people, unfortunately, will fight the model all the way to the horizon and it will disappear and you'll never see it again because you're thinking, I can just get it back, I can just get it back. Not always a wise move. I recommend to people, once you can no longer tell which way the model is going, just cut the throttle and let it land. Cut the throttle because all you're doing is increasing the distance you have to walk and making it harder and harder to find the model. If you can no longer tell whether it's coming or going, you are never going to fly that model back. So cut your losses, put it on the ground. So once the model starts appearing as a little dot in the, or before then preferably, as far as when it's further away than you want to walk, land it. And even if that just means cutting the throttle and letting it glide whichever way it's going, that's better than having it disappear miles and miles away. Most people who fly in wind at some stage have lost a model because they just haven't been able to bring themselves to admit that they can no longer fly the model. It's too far away. Important point, if you want to keep your models, be prepared to bail. Be prepared just to cut the throttle and let it glide, which again, choice of model. You want a model that's got some stability. If you have a EDF A4 Skyhawk or something and you cut the throttle and you can't tell which way it's going to crash. But if you have an FMS Super Easy and you cut the throttle, it will glide gently to the ground. And again, choosing your flying area is important because as long as there's just grassy fields there, nothing's going to happen. If it's gliding gently onto a freeway or a motorway, bad things will happen. So that's why I say one of the first things, check your flying area. Make sure you're flying in a safe area. There you go. I think that's about it for what is perhaps a complex subject, but once you get the hang of it, trust me, you will look forward to the equinoctial gales every year because it is some of the best fun you can have with your pants on. It's like the turbulence, you've got to be right on the sticks, you've got to think, and when you do it, it's such a buzz to have flown a model. And I've flown models in winds which are possibly only 5 to 10 kilometres an hour slower than the maximum speed of the model. So it takes forever to make distance into the wind. Then you do those downwind passes, woo, really fast. Those are thrills you can't get any other way. And it's cheap. It's cheap. Use your cheapest model and you can have a ball of fun in a relatively small area because sometimes you can take off, you can do an entire flight without making a turn. If the wind is close to the flying speed of the model, you can back it in for a landing. That's the only time you don't have to be able to fly towards yourself. If the wind's strong enough, you can fly upwind and then you can just basically slow the model down, bring it down and then descend and land in front of you. I've done that many times. It's a real buzz doing that. So there you go. That's it. Questions, comments in the usual place, please. I'll do my best to answer them. Comments, especially, because I'd like to hear what other people have felt about flying in strong winds. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you just sit out the equinox? Or do you relish in the wonderful fun that can be had from flying lightweight models in strong winds? There you go. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Bye for now. Stay on the grass so you don't break a prop these days. Inverted takeoffs don't work, Neil. We've tried those. Short takeoff run. I don't think the wheels even turned that time, did they? Flying over hangs. Keep out of Neil's way, eh?
Yeah, you better.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's a 4-cell. I thought I had a bag of bloody 3 cells, but I didn't.
It was, I came in this way.